Dude, you are getting well. Dude, what's up? Welcome everyone to the show. This is season 2 of Dude, You're Getting Well, and I'm here with a very special guest today, Rainier Wylde. Rainier, welcome, brother. How are you?
Doing good. Thanks for having me on, Ben. God, I love that intro. That's so great.
Yeah, what did you love about it?
Well, first of all, I just love anywhere that's warm. I live in the Pacific Northwest, and so I was seeing that, and at least in the fantasy, my mind told me it was a beautiful 80 degrees, and that water was cool and refreshing, and you were living your best life right then, and I was all into that.
Nice. Well, you painted it perfectly. That's exactly what was going on. It's really amazing. And it was funny. I was in that. I've been leading a retreat for 10 years for musicians in Paradise in Central America, and bringing people back to their roots and back to their bodies, and teaching musicians mindfulness and performance and balance. And I ran into a friend, a videographer, in the middle of this jungle, and he was like, "Ben Curtis," and I was like, "JJ Wolf." He lives in Boston, and we ended up making that video together. He created that for the show out of my dedication, because I was kind of creating this as I was there. And I promised myself I would bring that back to the cold New York winter. And I took up snowboarding this year. And that was going really well until I just fractured my wrist like 2 days ago.
Oh my gosh.
But I made it to the end of the season, and I believe the universe is teaching me an opportunity to ask for help a lot, to surrender, to reach out to all my brothers. Like, I'm having to be like, "Hey, can you bring a meal? My wife's out of town. Can you sleep with me tomorrow? Can you take me here? Can you pick me up? Can you help put my deodorant on, or like get my pants on?" And it's been someone reflected, I'm a giver, and I love it. And so, to receive has always been uncomfortable. So it's been a gift to practice receiving this week.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's a reason I'm here with you today. What are you hearing in this?
Well, I think when you said that, one of the things that triggered me is a question that I don't believe. I don't believe this question. I don't agree with it. I don't think it's true, but it gives us a great access to possibility when we ask questions like this, if not this kind of question. But why would you want to fracture your wrist or break your arm? Why would that be something you want to do? And I love those kind of questions, because they start to push us to some kind of inner knowing, right? It's like, oh, I just heard you say it. I'm so used to giving. I'm so used to putting myself out there for others. And in this moment, what I am wanting to do, I didn't even know I was wanting this, but what I'm wanting to do is to receive. And I'm having to. I love that.
Thank you for that reflection. A lot of that could be challenging for some of us. I love that question. Why am I wanting to do this? Right? Oh, what a beautiful reflection. Well, I love the way you speak and the way you think. Where did you come from?
God, my wife always asks me that same question. I grew up all over the lower 48 United States in the back seat of a station wagon. My father was an itinerant evangelical televangelist, and I grew up in kind of the belly of the beast of middle America, seeing the glitz and the glamour and the despair and the poverty of soul. And so much of my life, I think, more and more is reflective of those places I saw, this deep hunger for change. My father actually just recently passed away, which is why I'm a little reflective of it. But I look back on my childhood, and one of the things that kind of just jumps off the pages at me is this deep sense of hope that was there in people, a hope that some decision, some choice made in the welling up of the moment, made in the tender bud of reflection, that life isn't what they wish it was, but some decision that comes out of that place would forever alter their destiny, and that they would take control of petty and miserable lives and somehow come into a new standing. And I watched that play out week after week after week. Now I've gone far adrift out of those belief structures or those faith systems. But when I look back, I think, those are the mechanisms that I really grew up admiring. And I still do. So, you asked me, where did I come from? That's got to be one of those places.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
love
deep
that. Thank you
change.
so much for sharing that with me. Rainier, I hear around the hope. Um,
Yeah.
and I mean, you spoke it so eloquently. I'm like, I'm sold. Where do I sign up for this new church of yours? um, we share something. My father was a minister as well.
Oh my
And
goodness. Wow.
unlike yours, mine stayed in the same place. And, went through his own process and also recently passed away. So I
Oh
just want to
wow.
say I have compassion for that. It's
Yeah.
probably one of the greatest life experiences,
Mhm.
a human can have. And most of us.
Yeah.
So what, so you grew up traveling with him, and
Yeah.
then how'd you get from there to where you are today? Like, what
Right.
happened along the way? I mean, maybe the movie trailer version. Like,
Yeah.
what in that, is there any part of that hope that you talked about that you saw that, I mean, I can hear it in your voice today. Like, how does that light you up today? Like, how does that connect to who
Hmm.
you are today?
Well, I think I spent my my late adolescence consumed with what the Smashing Pumpkins refer to as the resolute urgency of now, right? And crucifying the insincere tonight. And I gave my heart to rock and roll. I became a singer songwriter, and spent a lot of my time kind of cultivating, bringing my emotions, bringing my soul into the center of creativity, and that was a real beautiful thing. And during my mid-20s, I also um, was very interested in people who would belong to one another, so to speak, people who would give their lives to each other. And so I created, along with some of my best friends, a spiritual community. It didn't necessarily have any particular religion it was correlated with, but a contemplative community dedicated to meditation, mindfulness, prayer, and working together, building a life, sharing a life together. That became very formative, these two experiences, this deep creativity and then this experience of community that was really important to me at the time. That ended in my late 20s. I had gotten a degree in psychology and then had gone on to get my master's degree and ended up becoming a psychotherapist. I specialized in chronically suicidal and self-harming clients, and particularly borderline personality disorder. And the clients that I saw, that became really 100% of most of the people besides my family that I was seeing every day. And in so many ways, it was reflective of the places I grew up in childhood. And, I think it's interesting talking about all these things because one of the things that happened, and obviously growing up in the kind of home that you did, the home that I did, one of the things that was so important was climbing the ladder of success. And I look back on my life and I see how I was very obsessed with building the skyscraper of ego, building the resume self, so to speak. And I look back and I see a lot of my accomplishments simply were that. They were me climbing that ladder, me pushing ahead, me building something. And so I'm racking up degrees, I'm racking up certifications, and I'm doing all of these things. I'm getting the things I want. But here's the thing about the ego: as tall as the ego grows, as high as it goes up, that skyscraper, the basement of shadows grows equally deep. And if this is the first time your listeners have heard that phrase, basement of shadows or shadow, it might be worth talking about. The shadow is everything you had to cut away in order to become the amazing, glamorous, wonderful person that you are today. In order
Mm.
to be the good little boy or good little girl that fit in with mom and dad or teachers or society at large, we had to cut away a lot of the impulses and instincts that we had that would have taken us out of relationship. Now, those are parts of us, so they don't actually get cut away. We don't actually amputate. Instead, we put them into hiding. They go into that basement, and there they lurk, they skulk, they're deposited, and they aren't resourced particularly well. Like our ego is resourced very, very well. We tend to hone our strengths, we focus on our assets, but the things that we cut away, especially very early on, they go unresourced, underdeveloped, and neglected.
Hmm.
And so, but they're still a part of us, and they're trying to tell us something. And so, over time in our life, those things begin to kind of crawl up and creep out of the basement and get into the main floor of our living. And as soon as they do, we say, "Oh my God, this is horrible. This is hellish. Get back into the basement. Please adjust. Don't be angry. Don't be lustful. Don't be don't be greedy. Don't be gluttonous. Don't be these things that we don't particularly like, that mom and dad didn't particularly
Mm.
like either." And so we try to cut it away. I came to a place in my life where I couldn't hide my basement of shadows anymore. I had a real glorious affair with a coworker. And actually, as it turns out, I had been cheating on partners my whole life. I hadn't
Mm.
been faithful to anyone I had been in relationship to. In fact, I couldn't keep agreements I made, not with myself, not with anyone else. I was
Mm.
unable to have integrity. And that Latin word, right? Integrity. What does that mean? It means that I was a fragmented self. I wasn't whole. I was a different person in every room I walked in. And so I was that golden, glittering, glamorous self, but I was also that shadowy person underneath.
Mm.
And finally, I had to confront those things. And for me, that confrontation came in the form of telling my partner, who I deeply loved, who I was deeply and profoundly committed to, that day on the beach, that I had actually been unfaithful to her, that I had actually betrayed her. And that epicenter became one of the moments that was so confronting in my life, that was so shaping in my life, that I had to actually deal with the things that I had cut away in order to belong. And through that process, I really became the person who I am today. And so a lot of people ask, like, "Oh, how'd you become this? How did you get all this insight?" And boy, I could really say it's because I studied, I read a lot of books, I traveled the world and met a lot of teachers, I listened to a lot of podcasts, I got a few degrees. That's not the truth, though. The truth is, I failed. I failed, and I learned to listen. And I think those two things actually began to create the person who I am today.
Mm. Wow. Thank you so much for the honesty and vulnerability there, and courage I hear in that story, and just to show up and be real. And thank you for telling one on yourself. For all of us out there who haven't faced that. I went through that in my marriage as well.
Hmm.
And actually, before I got married, we actually postponed our wedding. And I it took me a while to take responsibility for it. I blame my partner some. It's like a reaction to something, right? So I really appreciate how you took full responsibility for it in this situation. And I'm curious. I mean, it almost doesn't matter, but how your partner received it, and then what you did with it once it was out. Because I hear people talk about that, like, they want to tell their partner, one, mostly because they want to feel better, right? And then two, there's the part of, what now, or the shame or that self sabotage too that can come up, that I had to work on. Like, that was what mine was the saboteur, and
Yeah.
working through it. So what did you do with it from there?
Well,
How
thanks,
do you
by the way,
face those
for
shadows?
thanks for sharing
Yeah.
your own resonance with that. Appreciate that. And it's interesting, even kind of hearing you say that. I think the reality is, one of the things that I've learned, and just interacting with so many people, is how many of us are living out these quiet nightmares that we keep hidden in the closet.
Mm.
Whether it's the nightmare of betraying the one we love or being betrayed by them, right? Whatever that thing is, I think so many of us are wrestling with these things, and we don't talk about them. We hide, we skulk, and then we wonder why things stay the same, right? It's because we've actually already doomed ourselves to that kind of isolated place that created this mess in the first place. And so I think that we do ourselves a great service when we step forward into the light and say, no, this is true for me also.
Mm.
Standing there on the beach, I was assured of one thing. I was assured that I was going to lose everything I loved. I felt like I was juggling all these plates in the air, and I was watching all these plates fall. I was watching my career fall. I was watching my relationships with my closest friends. I was watching my reputation, and certainly the woman I loved. And all I could think about in that moment was if I could just say one honest thing after the other, if I could just say one truth, then I would preserve my own soul. That somehow or another, that I would make it out alive and I would make it out stronger. And that
Mm.
became kind of like the resonant gong of that moment that got me through. Later that night, my partner, who was absolutely grief struck by it, who was just as anyone could imagine, and certainly you yourself can resonate with, um, just so it was like an incomprehensible pain that the person who she had trusted the most could betray her like this. That night, she slept in the bed and I slept on the couch. And I can remember around 2 a.m. hearing a break in the sobs from the other room and hearing her call my name. And I said, yes. And she said, will you come in here? And I said, yes. And so I came in and she said, will you stand at the edge of the bed? And so I did. And she said, will you just touch my shoulder? So I said, yeah. And I did. And then she said, will you lie down next to me? And so I did. And then she said, will you just hold me? And I think that moment was really the first moment I ever held her. That moment, because all the illusions were gone. All of the masks that I had been wearing for so long, all that glittering self, that ego, was melted away. It was deteriorated. All the plates had been shattered. And it was just me, needy, sad, scared, me, holding her. The illusions that we had carried were stripped away. And finally, it was these two people who could see one another. And that began to be the place that we rebuilt from. That place that was no longer driven by the lies or the illusions. I think so many of our relationships are driven by lies and illusions. We meet not each other in reality, but each other as the masks we wear, right? Our best foot forward. And we spend a lot of our life in collusion to keep up those masks. And for us, we became very interested in asking questions that kept the masks from coming back on. It became a practice in radical authenticity. And so from that point forward, we became profoundly interested in hearing what was really going on, our thoughts, our feelings, our experiences. And that continues to today, right? And so really our work is to be totally authentic with one another. And all these years later, I have to say, am more happy than I could have ever imagined with this person, who she, in this whole process, and if she were here, I think she would say, discovered that she also had betrayed herself, that there was a mutual betrayal that was happening, that she had many desires and many hopes and many dreams that she was also being unfaithful to, so to speak, in order to keep up all these illusions. And so we discovered this mutual infidelity, this mutual self-abandonment. So really, in a way, we were both discovering ourselves and then discovering each other in the process. That's a very intentional work, very deep work, I think, and a necessary one. But the possibility, the real transformative possibility of moments like that is that you get to see what lies beneath. You get to see the under of things.
Mm. Yeah. Such a tender moment. My heart is just like right there with you in that bed. Like, oh my God. Um, And I just have to admit, like, I wish my wife had responded that well. um, she needed to respond how she did, but what resonated with me too is, and everyone's going to have their own story. Like, I don't mean to make this about myself, but I really, I was there with me, and my wife was like packing my bags. It was like, you're going to stay.
Yeah.
It's not at our apartment at all. I don't want you to get anywhere near me. But that's our dance. That's part of how
Yeah.
we rolled in the
Oh, that
past.
moment
So,
came for us too, by the way. It
okay,
just
good.
wasn't that moment.
Okay, cool. Thank you for sharing that too. Because, when people are like, no, we never argue, I'm like, what? But there's the thing you mentioned about the underbelly, and you said the basement
Yeah.
and these things underneath that come up, and you finally deal with them. And I really found that um, my experience working with relationships and in relationships is that, it's that willingness. In fact, I've had a few different couples counselors with my ex and with my wife, and I've asked them, like, what do you see in the couples that work? And it's like, it's not the couples who don't fight that make it. It's the ones who are willing to grow from that
Yeah.
upset, who are willing to make it. If one person isn't willing, it's very tough to do so. You really have to have that both willing partners. So I've had to restore a lot of trust just to get back to that conversation, and vice versa. We've gotten to do that regularly. Um, so I think, yeah, what I wanted to say is that thing around relationships, and that we know, like, what I noticed with that, and I wonder, making space for that underbelly, that it reminds me, like, we need, it's in the, I think our recent therapist said this, it's in the, like, friction that we grow stronger. It
Yeah.
reminds me of, like, a baby tree when it has new roots. It actually needs the wind to kind of blow it around in order to strengthen its roots. Um, and
Wow.
so how we recover from these things, I think, not like how can we avoid upset, which is obviously nice to have, but, like, if we're really doing our work and not people pleasing, people will stop being pleased, and we have some boundaries we honor, and eventually there's mutual respect and trust through that. So, can you talk to me a little bit about how you've developed, like, how you and your wife or partner have turned towards each other? What are some of the work you've done together, or some tools that you've seen, or some things that maybe you teach or see in other people that have been really helpful for this restoration practice?
I think probably the first thing that I would say in this, and we're really kind of talking about it here, one of the things that sets up for these places, these fallouts, is the unacknowledged self.
Mm,
Uh, so the first step I would say in any relationship actually begins with self. It begins with a commitment um, to radically accept all of yourself,
mm,
all of your thoughts, all of your feelings, all of your experiences. They all belong. Everything belongs.
mm,
So one of the things that we commit to is we commit to no longer cutting out valuable information about who we are and how we perceive the world, namely
mm,
our emotions, right? We're very quick to cut away unwanted or unpleasant emotions. I
mm,
shouldn't feel angry right now. They're doing the best they can. I shouldn't feel so annoyed at them. I should ignore that emotion. And then 2 weeks later, we explode on them and they go, where the hell did that come from? Right. Well, we've been sitting on something, probably not just for 2 weeks, probably for the last 20 years.
mm,
Right. And so what we have to realize is that a lot of our resentments come from unacknowledged emotions and expectations, ones that probably, first of all, we told ourselves we shouldn't have, we shouldn't be experiencing. So the first thing for any relationship is for the individuals to get very, very serious about noticing what's going on in their own life, in their own dealings, and to say, I refuse to cut away parts of myself anymore. That doesn't
mm,
mean I act on them. That doesn't mean I go out and I become those things. But now I'm committed to acknowledging those things. I'm committing to noticing them and saying, and this too is a part of me. It may be the most under resourced or scared part of me, but it's a part of me. And probably the parts that are most wounded and most scared and most needy and most, well, unwanted are also probably the parts that need the most love and compassion anyway. So
Mm.
that's where we start. That quickly translates into a second thing, a second skill. Not only am I radically accepting all the parts of me, but I'm now committing to radical authenticity in relationship to those parts to you. So in relationship and committed connection, not only am I choosing to experience my experience fully, I'm choosing to let you into that experience fully.
Mm.
And I think that becomes very scary for people.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say that's I can see that's the place where like, yep, that's where I stop. Yep, fully in. Nope, never even experienced that before. Right, I can see like my resistance to it at times. I can see my partners, but focusing on ourselves here, which I've always found is helpful. um, what do you find are the ways that you're able to do that? Like to receive? Like, how do you practice receiving? I mean, that's it, right? You practice it. That's one way, but how do you, Rainier, practice it?
Yeah. Well, let's just talk about a moment of radical authenticity that happened not all that long ago. We have a routine practice of clearing resentments. And
Mm.
how you clear resentments is you say, you get a certain amount of time. The floor is yours. And you say every resentment you can until you have discharged all of your resentments to the other person.
Wow.
And so it's amazing how many resentments you can come up with. One of my favorite parts of this practice was really, I think, one of the first times we ever did it. And my wife started, and we got through that. And then it became my turn. I said, I don't really have any resentment. For the most part, I don't resent you that much. And I really believed it. I said, but there was this one thing. There was this one thing. And I shared it. And all of a sudden, after I shared it, then I was like, well, and there was that other time that, and boy, I was off to the races. And that's how it works. And boy, that's so good. So I'm thinking of this recent moment, and my
Mhm.
partner is sharing, and it's becoming like this voluminous dark cloud. And so the first thing you notice is your desire to be very defensive. Well, she's got me all wrong. And in resentment clearing, what you do is you don't present the most passive, sanitized version of your resentments. You present the least judicious, least considerate version of your resentments, because that's the part that's lurking in your mind in the first place. That's actually what's owning
That's
your
the
thoughts
part we
as it
never
is.
say, right? That's that one thing that's always there that you're like, well, I can't say that.
Right. And so there she is, and she's telling me, well, I think you're really calloused sometimes. And I think that sometimes you don't, and boy, going off. And there was that one time, and I was noticing all of my defensiveness come up, and all of my armoring, and all of my desire to put the shoe on the other foot and get her to see that actually it was her that she. And how do you receive? You simply receive. You simply acknowledge that this process, while it is about you, it is also not about you. It is about the content of their thoughts. And then I stood there and I said, is there anything that you would like me to take full responsibility for?
Mm.
And then that's asking her to get more specific. And then she says, well, out of that great 30 minutes of resentments that I just shared with you, here's 3 things that stand out. And then instead of getting defensive yet again, instead of holding that, I took full responsibility. I said, yeah, I can actually see that. I validated her. I said, I get where you're coming from. You're not crazy. You're not out to lunch. I get how if I was in your shoes, I would feel the same way. I can take responsibility for my part in this. And I'm sorry for what was created in you when I did that. The
Mm.
most amazing thing happens when you learn to fully receive without trying to fix or trying to get them to change their opinion about you. When you lose your addiction to being right or
Mm.
looking good, something beautiful can happen. You can actually help walk each other into the compassionate place of home. You can actually walk each other into this beautiful homecoming.
Mm. Wow. And you lose your addiction to being right. I love that. I'm writing that slowly with one hand. And I love it. Wow. I got so much value out of this. I can't wait for my wife to come back to practice some of these things. Because I really benefit from structure, and we have some spaces like that, and we have a weekly meeting. But I'm really digging this, like really digging this, and I have some questions for you.
Let's
Like
go.
already, like a couple. I have a couple. Like my inner skeptic is like, let me ask him. Let's see about this. So first of all, what have you found? And it's going to be different for every relationship, probably. But what have you found as a like what feels like a good amount of time for you to each share?
Yeah. So if this is the first time that you've done this, buckle up. The first time that my partner and I ever did this, it was a total of 3 hours.
Wow,
And I'm going to tell you the exact structure so that you have it. Okay. I'm going to give you the
got it.
exact structure because I kind of alluded to it, but I'm going to give it to you on this one. Okay. The
Okay,
exact
amazing.
structure is this, and it's very necessary. It's stilted language and it's necessary language. And you'll see why by the end of it. I resent you for. And that is how it has to be. I resent you for. So why? Well, there's two things. The first is an I and the second is a you. There's a subject and an object. And there's something in between that subject and object, which is the resentment. And so by naming what's in between, you actually give the ability at the end of it, having cleared everything out, having cleared the chimney, as Freud said, having cleared the chimney of all its dirt and grime, now you have an open space between the I and the you. The resentment is cleared, it's exfoliated. You've said it. Now, here's how that looks. I resent you for being an asshole. Now, actually, that's a real low resentment. Like, I don't know what that means. So, you want your resentments to be more and more specific. How was he an asshole? I resent you for not taking out the garbage. And instead, for making me take out the garbage all those times. You did it last week and the week before. You get more and more specific. That way you're not just living in theory or idea, which isn't real. You're getting
Specific helps.
tangible.
Yes, that's a really good point.
And then as you get to the end of it, so let's just say you're a good 20 minutes into sharing your resentment. You get to 20 minutes and you're like, I've done most of it. Then you pause and you ask yourself, is that everything? And maybe your partner looks at you and says, is that everything? And then you reflect if it is or not. And if your body feels clear, you say, yes, that's everything. And then your partner has the opportunity to share their piece and they do it. Now, here's the best part about this. As soon as your partner goes and they say their 20-minute little bit, you're going to notice you've got more resentments.
I was just gonna say, there's got to be more coming.
All of a sudden it comes up and you're like, you son of a, you know what? I resent you for resenting me in that last thing that you said.
Yeah,
And that's how it rolls. And here's what's so great. By the end of that, you're exhausted. You're depleted. It's gone. The fight is gone. And because you're not dealing with someone on the other side who is struggling to be right or to look good, you're not clamoring someone. You're not having that adrenaline rush of having to fight back either.
yeah.
You're in that place of acceptance.
Mm. Amen, baby. You heard it here. If any of you guys are, I mean, there's definitely people listening. There's no comments, and I think that's just people are just like, all right, I'm taking notes. But I'd like you to comment on what's landing and what's resonating. If you're picking up any of this, I'm definitely taking notes. I love it. And if you're listening, thank you. And please don't forget to subscribe so we can get this message and medicine out there to more people like you or more people who could use it. And share it with someone who you
Mm.
think this would resonate with. I'm really digging it. I can't wait to share this with people. Rainer, so I've been in recovery in the
Mm,
12 step program, and resentments is a big, big, big part of that work. I think it's
yeah.
one of the reasons that program works so well is because resentments is one of the biggest clears. And it's part of
Mm,
the fourth step work in the 12
mm,
steps. And a lot of that is writing out resentments. And there's like, depending on who your sponsor is, I had this like guy that, I mean, I was doing this for like a year or something, 6 months before he'd like pass me off. Cause as you start developing and there's a structure, and it
yeah.
was all about taking responsibility for I'm resentful at for the
Mm,
reason being what's behind that is my part is, and then my
mhm.
sponsor would be like, I think I'm a special person because blah blah blah. Once I'm my wife found them and he's like, you got to hide this, but I also had my like sexual inventory and all the
Yeah.
resent, and so she was reading like, I think I'm a special person because, and it's like, it's not supposed to be literal, it's like looking for your self entitlement and self reflection. And I was mortified, and I realized like she found out things that I wasn't willing to share with her.
Mm,
And so I
yeah.
got like what I thought, and resentments I've been taught are like drinking poison, expecting the other person to die.
Hmm. Yeah.
And so what comes up for me too, and the critic I was mentioning earlier is like, what's appropriate to share? Like, for me, I have, so I'll say this, what's speaking is someone who's been in a verbally abusive relationship on multiple occasions. And I now have I've worked a long time to develop some really good, healthy boundaries around that. I did not have the self-esteem to be able to do that in the past, or the tools. I do now. And I found that there's certain things that don't feel helpful to hear. And there's certain things that my partner's requested I don't share, even if it's a resentment I'm feeling. It's actually, she's asked that I share that with another guy in my life, or with a
Mm.
sponsor, or with someone else, maybe not her. So do you all have any agreements in like what's okay to share or not? I mean, I hear you really just giving yourself an opportunity to take the gloves off and take the meaning out of it. But have you
Yeah.
ever found like, that actually really didn't feel good, and it like causes more harm? Like, where do you find that edge?
I think one of the things that we have to acknowledge is that society is built on secrets and lies. That so much of our culture is is a mask and a series of masks and a series of inauthenticities. We are rather constantly self-betraying, and we're rather constantly inviting others to do the same.
Mm,
Almost nobody expects that people we're in relationship to say nothing of the politicians or the leaders who lead us, are honest with us. The
mhm,
only time we expect them to be honest with us is when we catch them in a lie that deeply affects us, and then all of a sudden we start to scream about it. But most of us acknowledge that lying is fundamental to our society, telling half truths, avoiding the truth,
mm,
or just telling outright lies.
mm.
The problem is that we discover that we're not really in relationship. We have built a wall between us.
Oh God, like the amount of guys that like, why would you ever tell your wife that you cheated on her? That was a terrible idea. If you hadn't said anything, your relationship would be fine and you could have just moved on.
Right. Yeah, like the first time I ever went to a sexual addiction group, I
Mm,
remember I heard a guy say, "I'm here because I was caught." Right? No ownership there. But that was the idea. Oh my God. Somehow or another, someone crawled over the wall and saw my shit.
mm,
Now, I have committed in my life, and my partner has committed in her life, and towards one another, we've committed in our shared life not to have a wall between us.
mm,
I want to see the person on the other side at all costs. When we
At
talk
all
about,
costs. I want to
yeah,
stay. I don't want to step over that. That was really powerful, Rainier. I want to see the person on the other side at all costs. I just wonder, if you're listening out there, how many of you experience resistance when you hear that? I do. That's why it came up for me. I'm wondering if it's like at all costs. Like, I don't want to lose my relationship, and yet I hear my partner saying, "This is why I want to revisit our relationship every 5 years and say, like, is this working? Is this costing us more, or is this benefiting us? And if it's costing, how what can we do we need to open our relationship or allow ourselves to set ourselves free? I never want to be in a loveless marriage. So she really has had that commitment to keeping it fresh and present. And that's, that can be scary for someone who's recovered from abandonment complex. Like, hold on tighter. But I found the opposite is true. The more I can
Yeah.
allow her that space, the more I feel free. And so does she. So how does this work for you? All this I'm sharing.
You know,
Just bring up.
something you just said kind of triggered a thought here. We are willing to stray outside of our relationships. We're willing to open our relationships. We look for new relationships, all in this attempt to meet someone we've never met before. But I've got to be honest, the person standing next to me, who I think I know so well, also conceals a stranger who I have undoubtedly never met before.
Mm.
How do I know that? Because when they share that thing that triggers the hell out of me, I tell them very quickly, never say that again. Never say that again. I don't want to know this person. I want them to be a stranger to me.
Mm.
Right? We are
Mm.
profoundly committed to colluding with one another to make sure that we don't see the real person. And yet we will go seek out other people so that we can know someone different. You don't have to seek someone else out. All you have to do is get honest with the person next to you. You will be astonished at the stranger you meet.
Wow, that is gold right there. Oh my God. I love it. Yes. My wife's a double Gemini and I'm a double Scorpio. We laugh about that. And we're in a band and we have many personalities in the band. But they've not all made themselves wear it way into the bedroom. And now I'm like, why not?
Yeah,
Like, why are we only allowing ourselves to be seen on stage and
that's right.
not in places like I mean, I actively take this on. I love to interview people around intimacy and relationships because we have both experienced that profoundly in other relationships, but not in this one at all times. And we're very intimate, touchy feely, embodied people, and there's still like a blocks for us. And so we're looking at I'll talk for myself, like how to step in and learn more about where's that wall I'm putting up that I can't even see that I'm putting up. And
Yeah.
my partner keeps saying, "You're putting up a wall," and I'm like, "No, I'm not." Or I'm telling her like, "There's your wall," and she's like, "I'm not." We don't see each other yet. We're building them. And
Mm,
and so I just love that you're like, what if you just start to ask what's really going on with that person?
yeah.
And what I thought you were going to say is the other person inside of you,
Oh, that
right
too.
inside of us.
Oh,
Like,
shocker.
what if we got to really know ourselves on that level? And so what I'm hearing out of all this is like getting honest with that, finding a safe space and a container in which to
Yeah.
do so. You didn't just show up and be like, "Hey, honey," bleh. You really created the space, the setting in which there could be safety and trust.
Yeah, I love that. And actually, I wanted to go backwards. You mentioned about being in verbally abusive or those kind of relationships. I
Mhm.
think that it requires a commitment of two willing people, and you mentioned that earlier, to create this kind of container where this is possible. If you have one person who's doing all the honesty, I think back of a moment when I was young. There was a men's group I can remember going to with my father, and it was a Christian men's group.
Mhm.
And I think my father wanted to expose me to these cooler, older men halfway between his age and mine. And maybe I would see something I'd look up to. And this particular night, we got together, and the point was to confess. It kind of was like this, but it was a confessional where everyone would confess what they were doing wrong. And so I remember it started off with Bob over there in the corner. And Bob confesses some really heinous stuff. And I think I was like 15. I was like, holy shit. And then, it keeps going. And then there's Dave, and Dave has his piece. And then there's Steve and Steve. And we go around the room. And I remember it getting to a guy, and it's gone around. And even I mustered up something to confess. It wasn't that pretty. It was like, well, I masturbated about your daughter, sir. And, I mean, it's like, but in the spirit of confession, we're all putting it out there. We get
Yeah.
around the room, and it comes to this one guy This one guy, and he's the very last guy. And he looks at all of us, kind of looks us all in the eye, shrugs his shoulders, and said, "Well, actually, I'm good, guys." Now you can't build these moments on those kind of relationships. You have to have a willingness to have two people enter into this place.
Mm.
You also have to have the scaffolding to say, and we're willing to work out the aftermath that happens after we've been honest with each other. This isn't going to be an event. This is going to be a lifestyle.
Mm. Thank you for talking about that. And I hear like aftercare in that.
Yeah.
Right. This isn't a dumping session. You're being intentional with each other. And then I hear some care afterwards, which is really beautiful. It's very wow. I mean, what if we could learn that? In fact, I mean, I will support you or be a business partner or investor in anything, but I would love to create a curriculum with you or created by you or supported one that you create for people in schools to learn these things. Like, could we learn
that's great.
relationship skills in high school, right? As we're learning about our bodies and what to do, or even little children learning conflict resolution. I mean, it's showing kids are great at it. And they learn it from us. And so when they get bad, it's because we don't have it, right? And so we're learning to rely on technology, but we're actually not practicing it with humans in conversation. I don't believe.
Yeah.
I think we're getting really good at outputting, but we're not necessarily, there's not a lot of space for reflection and connection inside of that.
So true. And, our ability to tolerate the distress of confronting someone, being disappointed with someone, them being disappointed with us is lower and lower. I think we kind of go from one dopamine hit to the other, largely driven by technology. And we don't really know how to sit through those hard moments, those difficult conversations. That's when we have to scrap it and go on to the next relationship. Mm-hmm. Right. And there's 7.8 billion people and counting on this planet. People are pretty interchangeable and disposable. I don't have to resolve conflicts with a lot of people. I can just move on to the next set of friends.
Well, that landed. Well, I would love to. I could talk to you for hours. I hope I get to meet you in person one day. Maybe we can make some music together.
Sounds good.
You're always welcome to come to our retreats anytime, so we'll stay in touch. I have a few closing questions, and you've added so much value to this show, so I'm just thrilled. I have, the hardest job will be like, what are the best quotes to pull from all of this? But it's just wonderful value. And if you just dropped in or you're listening to part of this, I encourage you to really go back and listen through and see where you can apply some of this to your life. But there's a few closing questions I'd love to ask you before you go. Do you have a couple more minutes?
I sure do.
Okay, great. So if your life were a Hollywood film up until this point, what would the title of it be? What would you name it?
Oh man, that is like the hardest question I've heard. I don't know if I've ever heard a harder question.
What's the first thing that comes to mind?
Well, I titled my book something that is a near and dear phrase to me, and I think it still applies here, as you are. Which is this deeply rooted belief that the love that we so desperately want doesn't come to our self that we cover over with masks. The love that we so deeply crave is actually always when we step into that bold place of being as we are. Yeah.
That's beautiful. And where's your book available?
You can get that on Amazon. Just look up Rainier Wylde, As You Are.
Okay. We'll put a link to that in our show notes when we send this out on the podcast next week. Now, if your wife was to title this movie, what do you think she would call it?
The Hills Have Eyes. Such a great, I don't know. It's probably been a bit of a roller coaster for her. That's a great question. I'm going to have to ponder that, man.
You could ask her.
As I thought you were.
That's great. And the sequel will be The Hills Have Eyes.
Right.
That's great. And the last, this is sometimes could be the most challenging for some people. But I really want to encourage you just to name the first thing that comes to the top of your head. If you could cast anyone from Hollywood in this movie as your parents, who would you cast as your parents?
Oh, wow. This was so good. Man, you ask good questions. Okay.
Thank you.
um, I think Dennis Quaid is playing my dad.
Ooh, wow.
Not like cousin Eddie Dennis, but
Hmm.
more like when he portrayed Lyndon Baines Johnson.
Mm.
Um, but I think that's who I would cast. And my mom, I think I would probably cast the mom from that 70s show. I don't remember.
Oh,
Uh,
she's a great Edie.
yeah.
Some I can't quite think of her name, but that's great. Yeah, we know who you're talking about. That's
They would
wonderful.
run her through a heavy Southern accent, but that actress for sure.
That's great. Where was your mom from?
Well, she's from Oklahoma, which doesn't inherently have a Southern accent attached, but every year she isn't in the South, she gets more and more of a Southern accent. So at this point in
That's
time, she
great.
hasn't lived there in 50 years, but she is the most Southern belle I've ever met.
That's amazing. That's great. Um, and then the second last question is, what's your favorite curse word?
Oh. I am very partial of saying the word fuck. I do happen to believe that you can use it in every possible way, and I try to often. Um, I also say goddamn a lot. And I like to say it, and damn itself ranks highly. So I think yeah. I actually think goddamn and damn are probably, even though I don't necessarily say them as standalone expletives like I do the word fuck, I do use them more in like literary sentences. Like when I say like you're a goddamn festival, and I really mean it as a compliment. But I love that phrase. You're a
Mm.
goddamn festival.
I mean, from the son of a preacher, it's very telling. I
It,
remember my dad tried to wash that phrase out of me. Uh, it's great. Um, and the last question I have for you, Rainier, is if you could give the world one gift today, what would you give us?
Hmm. Yeah, the courage to choose a joyful life. And it begins with authenticity.
The courage to choose a joyful life, beginning with authenticity. And if we all were suddenly given the courage to choose a joyful life, what do you see us all doing?
probably, probably a lot more sex. There would be mind blowing orgasms. There would be incredible flights of fancy and psychedelics. There would be amazing and compassion. I'm just joking. Henry Miller talked about this thing he called the hour of man. And I love this idea. And it's the idea that once a week the world shuts down and everyone turns to their neighbor and says, "What's really going on in your life?" And you tell each other, like Mary Oliver says, "I'll tell you of my despair. You tell me of yours." And we listen to one another for an hour. And I
Mm.
love that. I think that actually that is probably what a courageous, joyful, authentic life looks like. It looks like turning to the people near you and saying, "Tell me of your despair. I'll tell you of mine."
Oh, hmm. It's so beautiful. Wow, I'm really moved by that. And by you. Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you, Dad, for sending your son through this intense experience that helped him come out this wonderful human today. Honor our fathers. I've been inviting my father's spirit into my morning meditation and ask him to kind of
Wow.
be with me and help me through these things. So for anyone who's lost someone out there today, I gift that to you. An old
Wow.
friend of mine who all his friends were dying. He was in his 80s. He said he just started sitting them one by one down next to him during meditation.
Oh, wow.
I really love
That's
that.
beautiful.
Yeah. So thank
Mm.
you for the gift you gave me and everyone today. And thank you all for listening. Be sure to subscribe, check out Rainier Wild and his book. I'm going to order this for sure, as you are. And man, you're a gift just as you are. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much, Ben. It's really been my honor.
Yeah, my pleasure. I look forward